I could never imagine while working in France and in Belgium that there were countries where children diagnosed with type 1 diabetes had never the hospital structure nor the medical education to accompany them on this path, which is not funny, a really difficult one. That was the first step in thinking, what am I doing? Since we have everything there, and here in Chile we have nothing. How can we do so that the children here have the same rights as a French, Belgian or Swiss child, in order that they can live normally with their diabetes and have all the resources to do so at a personal, professional, but also at a hardware level?
Therefore, this lack of means strengthens you in the basics, the indispensable. We can do nothing, but in any case, we must do this, this and that.
We're in a country of contradictions between places where there is everything, and even the same things that in Europe, and places where we have nothing. Where I am, there is nothing. At least we're not lost in the technique. We're much closer to a human relationship between a professional and the family. Here we're much closer to the earth. First of all, because the earth moves all the time, and that reminds us regularly that she is alive, and we're much closer to the spirits of nature. And there are rights here. Before building a house, you must always ask permission from the mountain guardians to have the right to build and live in a place.
The Andes Cordillera is...
It's just on the other side, and when it snows, it's completely white. And we really have this Cordillera at 4,000 meters. There's such a view. And for me, to get up every morning and see it, I know why I'm in Chile. Chance has it that I met some of the families who live here in the valley and who have a child with type 1 diabetes, until I realized that there were 80 in this valley and that there was no one to help them. And they said to me, "But Julie, it's not possible that we have someone who knows so much, but who can't treat us." So that's what drove me to say to myself, I have to restudy medicine in Spanish in order to pass the exams and have the diploma as a GP to be able to treat them officially. Because until then I would do free workshops just for them to have the minimum knowledge. It's been a long journey, but you know, all the best paths are long, aren't they? Since the time I've known you, and since the time I started therapeutic education, it's been a long road, and it never stops.
But it's still extraordinary in the field of therapeutic education as I see it today, where it's not an accompaniment, but an overloading of information. And you illustrate this basic element. To make understood is to accompany. And in this word accompany, there's a notion of bread to share.
Here we're in the countryside. Most parents haven't done any studies. The children go to the village school. So, to give a lot of information, the first thing I realized when I arrived here was that the families were badly treated. They were badly treated in the sense, well, we had made the diagnostic for a type 1 diabetes, which for me is a disease of rich countries, because it requires a lot of money to receive a good treatment and a good follow-up. And in fact, they were given the treatment, but no one ever explained anything to them. In fact, they had the treatment. They did all they could by injecting their children with the insulin, trying to do everything correctly, but without knowing absolutely anything. So the first thing that I realized was that they just needed to be cared for, and to be hugged, and to be told that they were no longer alone, and that we had to move forward together. Now, regarding information, truthfully, we go slowly, because I quickly realized that it's not possible for them to understand all these medical concepts, because we're talking about a world that has nothing to do with theirs.
So therapeutic education is an accompaniment. It's not information.
It's true that all the families have my phone number, or whether I follow them or not, because there are some people who can't afford to come and see me in consultation, even if the price is very moderate. But there are families for whom it's difficult. And I don't see why it would be an argument to have a good follow-up. So these families contact me when they have doubts about the treatment, and it just takes me 5 minutes to ask them, right, what do you think would be the options? Because the idea is not to give them an answer immediately, but to make them think about it.
It's beautiful what you said, because there's the doctor in his diagnostic role. And then the training structure is, are you sure that it is this diagnosis and not that one? And then you have to justify everything. The intellectual approach of the diagnosis, the differential diagnoses. In your case, it's the same doctor who trained himself to make these diagnoses and these differential diagnoses. So he becomes the index of certainty.
Every minute there's a choice to be done, and in the end, the professionals write a prescription, which they give to their patient, and after that the person has to get by with it. And sometimes there are lots of decisions which are more subtle than, if the glycemia is such and such, you do this. Because if the blood sugar is such, you have to do this. But what are you going to eat? And what will be the physical activity? Did something happen which has disturbed him? Or how is it at home? Or how do you cope with it? So in fact, there are lots of things which will allow to correctly determine the insulin dose, and that we cannot do it. And the families have far more criteria to take into account than a doctor who prescribes the insulin dosage.
Then, when you explained to me the classical medical functioning, you said that in Chile, there's a technical and scientific equipment completely up to date, but that the doctors hardly dare to touch the patients.
It's not that simple, because they're not taught to do so. They're taught, as you say, to make diagnoses, to ask for the right examination. They are taught lots of things, but not clinically. Or rather, yes, they will examine the patient to see if he has a symptom, but they won't touch him as if to say, I'm here, or how's it going? The good thing is that at the university where I'm currently training young doctors, truly this step is being taken. We're in the process of working a lot with psychologists to learn how to announce a diagnosis. And then there's the work that we do with Sisku, my husband, introducing the tools of the clown, just to look at someone in the eyes, to touch him, to be able to say that a professional is also vulnerable, that he has emotions, and he's not a robot. The problem in medicine is that we are taught not to show emotions. We should keep them to ourselves. So at a certain point, the volcano explodes because we can't keep inside so many emotions, because we feel bad when we see a patient we cannot treat. We feel bad when we see someone who is not well. We're really angry when things don't work, or when we see that the patient doesn't respond and is on a road which will lead him to complications. But we're happy when it does work. I like to be able to congratulate the families when they've done something well. People in Chile are very supportive, especially the poorest ones. They're really very supportive, and that's something which has really impressed me, because in Europe we've lost that. We've lost that sense of solidarity. If anyone here has a need, here the people have to pay for everything. So if there's someone who has a treatment, for example, for chemotherapy, everyone starts making raffle tickets, cooking meals, in order to pay for the chemotherapy of the person who needs it. But what I realized with diabetes was that there are very isolated families who found it difficult to communicate with one another. And so we saw that they need to be able to meet in order to understand that they live the same thing, that they're in the same situation. The children need to share with each other, and they need a need for knowledge. They need to be together in a family, a big family where there's no need to explain to others what's happening.
Now what we see in the distance is a stack of hay covered by a blue tarpaulin. You've offered to create a sort of camping where families could come with their children in order to meet one another in a very simple and natural way, if I dare say.
Why not do it in nature, where we all live? We can share things, eat together, cook meals together. And all those moments are part of daily life, where we can integrate how do I manage the diabetes, without it being a course where they come and take notes. Because in the end, they learn more by doing things together than if I say, you should do this. And finally, when they're back home, well, they never had this ingredient. They don't know how it must be done. So it's easier for them to share. I'm not the one who talks. We all talk together. It's true that I'm very attached to these families because I recognize the energy and the force they put in a support which is not easy in the current situation. Admittedly, they don't have to pay for the insulin because Chile chose 10 years ago to offer insulin to all those who have diabetes. But for me, insulin is not the key. The key is education. The key is being able to accompany these patients. Insulin? You can have insulin and still have a glycated hemoglobin of 18. It's not insulin that will give them a good quality of life, which will allow them to do whatever they want in spite of their illness. Insulin is just one of the elements that help for that. Of course, without insulin, one dies. But even with insulin, one can die with complications.
I always wondered why you were so fascinated as a specialist, but fascinated by general medicine much more than by hyper-specialization in a small selective field of diabetes or endocrinology. And your life here, your example illustrates it in a great way. But even so, is it not somehow frustrating?
No, it was never frustrating. I wanted to do medicine in my own way. When I started my studies, I had an idea of medicine which was very human. And then, during the first 2 years, I had a cultural clash between my medical culture and that of... Because my mother is a doctor, but she always worked at home, so for me as a small child, my babysitters were her patients. She worked in the same apartment, and so while she was working, I sat on her patients' laps, and they read me stories, because she was in consultation. Consequently, I have this very human vision of medicine, which is sharing. So when I started medicine, and they began to tell me, in medicine, there is the heart, the kidney, I couldn't find what I'd looked for. Then I went through some crises, and when I finally decided to go on, it was to do as I wanted. It wasn't to follow the model that was imposed. I built my own medical path.
And then, in your medical career, you're going in the direction of a medical, ethical, aesthetic, and therapeutic fullness.
Let's say I have a feeling that I'm doing my job. In any case, I feel that I've found a balance here where I truly work as a doctor. I don't have the impression that I'm a psychologist. I really feel like I'm doing my job as a doctor. I adapt the doses, I make sure that both health-wise and clinically they're doing well, I make the biological examinations they need. But I'm not only that, because otherwise, if it's to repeat the same consultation 20 times over, I'd get bored. I like it. Each consultation is different. I have no idea what the people will bring me. Sometimes they come for a consultation and it's not a problem of insulin dosage. It's simply a problem of family dynamics, or with the child who's growing up and would like more autonomy. But the insulin doses are perfect. According to a biomedical scheme, we could ask ourselves, why should they pay a medical consultation? Because I'm not going to give them a medical prescription, because that's already done. I'm not going to change their dose. But there's a need of something else, to say, well, the situation is such, and how can we manage with this new data, which is more psycho-socially oriented, but which is just as important to understand whether they lack insulin or have too much of it.
How can you pass your message to young diabetologist colleagues who want to better understand, thinking that understanding allows you to be a better doctor?
For me, the challenge is to introduce therapeutic education right from the beginning of medical studies, to be able to show that therapeutic education is not something involving technique, but an apprenticeship regarding attitude. It's really, how do we place ourselves in relation to the other? Who is the most important? Is it us, professionals, with our ego, or is it our patient's life? The person who's in front of us is not just a diagnostic. Who is she? Where does she come from? What does she like to do? What are her ambitions? How am I going to help her with my medical knowledge? How am I going to help her so that she can achieve what she wants to do in spite of her illness? And in medicine, we are trained, we are formatted to be very serious all the time. I have friends who couldn't understand when I went into trouble, and it's true that I cracked up during my medical studies. I said to myself, I don't want to be serious. I don't want to carry this weight, this responsibility which is so important. And now, after 15 to 20 years of studies, of practice, we still write to each other, and they tell me, Julie, now we understand you, because now we realize in what we've locked ourselves, and what we now feel obliged to do because we've never shared with the person in front of us.
But that's tragic.
Yes, it's tragic, and it's true that the challenge is to be able to teach from the start, so that students can say to themselves, yes, I must be good, yes, I must be technical, but this medical technicality, we're not going to save the world. We will do our best for the world to be better, for everyone to feel better, but we can't do as if death does not exist, because we'll all die one day. Death has never been the failure of medicine. The medical profession mustn't feel like they're alone. I don't feel alone. As soon as I've had difficult moments, I called you. I called those key people who are important to me, because I know that they can support me and can understand the process in which I am.
You have to connect with others,
We have to work together.
with other sensitivities.
We must be able to mix, because we never know who will come to see us.